Hello everyone, it's 12 o'clock, so we might get started. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Julia Lappin. I'm the Clinical Director for the Tertiary Referral Service for Psychosis. I'm a clinician and researcher working as an Associate Professor at the UNSW School of Psychiatry and Mental Health. And over the past 20 years, I've been working clinically and in research aimed at improving outcomes for people living with psychosis. I'd like to begin by an acknowledgement of country and of lived experience. So I acknowledge the strength and resilience of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who are the traditional custodians of the diverse countries from which we are joining this meeting. I'm privileged to be calling from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present today. I also acknowledge people with lived experience of mental ill health and recovery, and the experience who have been carers, families or supporters. So welcome to the Mindgardens Tertiary Referral Service for Psychosis Seminar Series. The TRSP is a New South Wales Health funded statewide service which is hosted by South Eastern Sydney Local Health District. We're grateful to SESLHD and New South Wales Health and to the Mindgardens Neuroscience Network for their ongoing support of TRSP. The TRSP aims to improve lives of people living with complex psychosis. We do so through the delivery of our clinical service, which welcomes referrals from across the state of anyone living with psychosis and cared for in New South Wales Public Mental Health Services. We also run education and training programs aimed at developing a community of practice for capacity building in complex psychosis care, and this webinar series is an example of such capacity building. The webinar series is supported by the Mindgardens Neuroscience Network, a partnership between its members Neura, the Black Dog Institute, UNSW Sydney, and the South Eastern Sydney Local Health District. Mindgardens was established in 2019 to enhance collaboration between its members and to build translational research capacity in mental health, drug and alcohol, and neurological disorders. The Mindgardens TRSP Webinar Series runs through 2023 monthly, and we now have a full programme for the rest of this year, which is on the Mindgardens website. So please look out for emails from TRSP events, which will detail future webinars, all tailored for clinicians. Some housekeeping before I introduce our speaker for today. As participants in the audience, you can write questions in the Q&A, but you won't be able to speak or be seen. And there will be some anonymous polls towards the end of the webinar, and would really welcome if you could complete those so that we understand how worthwhile the event has been. We also appreciate your feedback by email, including topics that you'd welcome at future webinars. This event is recorded, and we'll distribute a link to the event video within 2 weeks to those who have provided an email address. You can opt out of our communications at any time with a return email stating unsubscribe in the subject line. So finally, it is my great honour to welcome Chloe Gott to give the talk today. Chloe's going to talk on the topic of cognitive remediation, which was voted by previous audiences at previous webinars as the top topic of interest. So Chloe's very much got expertise in this area. She's a clinical neuropsychologist working as part of the TRSP. And she's the project officer for the Cognitive Remediation Therapy program that's run through the TRSP and South Eastern Sydney Local Health District. Chloe's currently undertaking a PhD at the University of New South Wales, exploring how we can improve efficacy of cognitive remediation for people experiencing a psychotic illness. And she was supported to commence the PhD through a HETI Mental Health Research Award. So I'll hand over now to you, Chloe. Thanks.
Hi everyone, it's lovely to be here today. Thanks Julia for your very kind words. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Excellent. Thanks, Julia. All right. So today I'll be speaking about cognitive remediation therapy and looking at how we translate this online therapy into kind of real world outcomes. So I'll be providing some background on cognitive remediation, or CogRem as I may refer to it, and also discussing 3 case studies that I've seen through the Eastern Suburbs Mental Health Service. So very broadly speaking, CogRem or cognitive remediation therapy is a range of psychological treatments with using computerized programs with cognitive tasks. So historically they have been pen and paper tasks, but nowadays it's mostly computerized programs, and they're designed to improve thinking skills for people living with psychosis. So today I'll be referring quite heavily to the expert working group white paper that was developed in 2020, and that quite well describes the core elements involved in CogRem that should be involved as part of all CogRem programs, as well as some of the key techniques. So there are 3 core components of cognitive remediation. So these include cognitive tasks, the support of a therapist, and then bridging and the transfer of the skills practiced as part of the cognitive task to functional activities. So first and most important element is cognitive exercises. So we have consumers complete a wide variety of tasks that tap into different kind of cognitive skills. So targets can include attention, speed, working memory, learning and memory, executive functioning. So there's lots of different cognitive targets that can be treated as part of cognitive remediation therapy. They tend to vary in level of abstraction and difficulty, so they can range from quite conceptual tasks. So we have one here that's a task of visual attention. It's very abstract. You've got all these different elements in this design, and you're required to pick out the different elements as part of the task. But they can also be more closely related to day-to-day life. So the other task I have here is also a task of visual attention, I would say, but in this case, the person's required to navigate around a supermarket. So the idea behind these tasks is that we want them to gradually increase in difficulty throughout the program. And typically when you're working with a consumer, you'd probably be expecting to be doing the cognitive exercises directly about 70 to 75% of the time while doing the program or during a session. So the second, and I would say also equally important part of cognitive remediation is having an active therapist. So the therapist has a number of important kind of contributions to the program and the therapy. So they are heavily involved in goal setting, so setting SMART goals with the consumer. They want to structure the program to support success and promote motivation, and also provide high levels of positive reinforcement and encouragement for consumers who are completing the program. A big part of being a therapist for CRT is modeling, talking about cognition and normalizing use of strategy. So, that's a big part of my practice. I'll discuss the strengths the tasks that I feel like I have strengths in, and the tasks that I do feel less comfortable with and less confident in. I also make it very clear when I'm using strategies myself, what I'm doing, why I'm doing. I'm very much about normalizing the strategies that I use and showing consumers that we all use strategies and cognitive strategies as part of our day-to-day life. And then also supporting the consumer with the transfer of skills gained to functional activities. So this idea of transfer or bridging to function, we want to be explicitly connecting the skills and the strategies learned in computerized tasks to experiences within daily life and the functional goals that the consumer has set. So this can be done and it can be embedded while discussing exercises, so kind of referred to frequently and routinely throughout therapy, And it can also be included as like a separate kind of activity and a separate discussion. So something at the end, it may be some role plays or scenarios if you're working in a group, having a bit of a discussion, some psychoeducation, or doing some games. So there's both kind of modalities can be explored, and both may often be used in the same session. And I think transfer is such a skill that a good therapist has. So it's how you connect the skills and the strategies learned in the program to the person's goals. So here again, we've got this very kind of abstract task of visual attention. So the idea and the skill which you would have as a therapist is how you connect the strategies and the skills that you're using in this task. So it might be something like scanning, attention to detail, to something that's really important for the consumer. So it may be something like learning how to drive. So it's all about connecting what they're doing in the program to things that are happening in their life and things that they want to be doing. So there are also some really core techniques that are used pretty much across all cognitive remediation therapy programs. So these include massed practice, errorless learning, and scaffolding. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail for each of those. So mass practice is the idea of repetitively practicing the same skill or task. And there's a couple of different ways that we incorporate this as part of cognitive remediation. So one of the ways is that we often have very short intervals between sessions. A cognitive remediation therapy program is typically, you're seeing a consumer about 2 to 3 times a week. Often how I incorporate that in my practice is I have 2 sessions that I'll see the person over a week, and then we'll try and have them do the extra session as homework. And the other way we can incorporate this is using the same skills and strategies across tasks. So you may use a note-taking strategy on both a learning task and a planning task. The same idea behind a repetition strategy. You would use it on a working memory task, and then you might also have it on a learning task where the person's having to remember the information after a period of a delay. So what this does is it both supports specific cognitive skills to improve and become more automatic for the person. And also it allows the principles about thinking to become more generalized, to become more abstracted, and then we can more easily transfer those to functional goals. And the idea behind mass practice over a sustained period of time, so typically around 3 to 4 months is the usual period for a where you're seeing someone for CogRem, helps in cognitive improvements become more long-lasting. So the other strategy we talk about is errorless learning. And the idea behind errorless learning is that for people with unaffected cognition, errors are actually a really effective way for us to learn. If we make a mistake and the consequences are in some way aversive, we're going to learn that we should not do that task or that activity that way again. But it can be much less effective for people who are living with cognitive impairment. We run the risk of people encoding and learning the error rather than the consequence. So what errorless learning does is it builds up procedural memories of successful behavior. So we ensure that the learner makes as few errors as possible while doing the task. And this may be helpful for a person with a diagnosis of psychosis who may have greater difficulties with aspects of explicit memory and other areas of cognition. The other really wonderful benefit of errorless learning is that it keeps up experiences of success and achievement really high while a person's doing a program, which is really good for motivation, it's really good for engagement. And we also know that many of the consumers and the persons who are completing this program may have had difficult or aversive experiences in formal education or as part of their schooling. And I think we don't want their participation in this therapy and their participation in this program to be another experience in that way. We want it to be something that the person feels really well engaged in and feels that they are experiencing success and achievement in. So the way we achieve errorless learning is through scaffolding. So Scaffolding is a way of providing support and hands-on assistance with the task. So a therapist can do this by demonstrating how to do a task or modeling how to do a task well, simplifying the task for a person, helping them break it down into steps to work through, and giving them prompts. The idea behind scaffolding is that it should be really personalized and adaptive to the individual, and that it's temporary and it fades with improvement. So we want consumers to feel responsible for their own successes. They're often working really hard in these programs, and it's really important that they feel that they are achieving that these successes are their own, and we want to encourage independence and control as well. So then we're going to go to the evidence base for cognitive remediation therapy. So we know cognitive remediation therapy is a really effective intervention. So that's been demonstrated by multiple recent meta-analyses. There's more meta-analyses. I've just concentrated on the 3 most recent ones. And we know that it's a really effective intervention for both cognitive outcomes. So we have effect sizes of 0.28 to 0.29, so small to moderate effect sizes, and for functional outcomes as well. So effect sizes of 0.16 to 0.29. And again, so small to moderate effect sizes. We do know that there is a much greater benefit when associated with an active therapist and also as part of a comprehensive rehabilitation program. What we don't know is there isn't really consistent evidence on what factors contribute to good outcomes in cognitive remediation therapy. So we do know that some people really, really strongly benefit from cognitive remediation, but we're not quite sure what clinical factors, what cognitive factors, or what other kind of personal factors may be contributing to those outcomes. We just don't have any kind of consistent evidence on that yet. So today, I'll be referring mostly to the Circuits program, which is the program that I use when I'm working with our consumers. So it's the Cognitive Interactive Remediation of Cognition and Thinking Skills program. And it was designed out of King's College London by Till Wykes and Claire Reeder. It's been very specifically designed for adults diagnosed with a psychotic illness. So the Reader paper goes into that in much more detail, but there was a fairly iterative process working with therapists, working with consumers to make sure that the program really fit the needs of the population that they were working with. And an RCT study showed improved cognitive and functional outcomes post-therapy. So the idea behind the Circuits program and the things that are slightly different about it compared to other CRT programs is there's a real focus on the development of metacognition, so thinking about thinking. So as part of that, you'll ask someone before they're starting the task how difficult they think the task will be. So you ask them to give it a rating out of 1 to 5, and also how long they think the task will take. And then at the end of the task, you'll do the same process. So you'll get them to rate how difficult they found the task, and then they'll also see how long it actually took them. So this is really a really important process in kind of developing metacognition, developing a person's understanding of their own thinking skills. If someone has a really strong discrepancy between their ratings, I think that's a really important point of discussion. Also, if they have like quite consistent like ratings, I think that's a really nice kind of thing to reinforce with the person that they have got a fairly good sense of their abilities and their strengths. So the other thing that's a little bit different about, or like kind of quite specific to the Circuits program, is that it's really explicit in its use and development of strategies. So a person doing the Circuits program, before they even go into a task, has to select a strategy that they want to use. So in this case, this is for a visual recall task, and the person has a couple of different strategies that are some of which are specific to kind of a more visual based task, using a ruler, using a grid, and others that are a little bit more can be done across a couple of different tasks as well. And the person can't actually get in and do the task until they've picked a strategy. And then at the end, we'll rate the strategy, how useful it was, have a discussion about whether they found it useful, whether they didn't find it useful, which tasks they found more useful than others, which strategies they found more useful than others. So I'm going to go, so that's a bit about the circuits program. So I'm going to go into the case studies now. So I'm going to speak to three consumers in the Eastern Suburbs Mental Health Service who I saw who completed the circuits program. So they reflect a variety of referral sources, presentations, chronicity, illness severity, and also a lot of variability in their baseline cognition, their overall functioning, the rehabilitation goals that they wanted to work on. All engaged really well with the program though, and all showed really nice outcomes. And I think it's been an opportunity to reflect on what makes a good CR-COGREM referral and consumers who are likely to participate really well in the program and kind of have good benefits from it. So the first person I'm going to speak about is Lauren. So Lauren is a 58-year-old woman. She's living with schizoaffective disorder. She was referred by her community rehab clinician, but actually while doing the program, Lauren was discharged from community mental health services and was actually just being seen through the clozapine clinic. She'd been managed on clozapine since 2010, and she'd had a last admission in 2015 after she'd self-seized medication. But she was very stable in the community. She was really well supported by her NDIS package. She was single, living independently in New South Wales housing. So Lauren did have this very strongly held belief that she had dementia. So she'd been seen by our neuropsychiatric service and they thought that her presentation wasn't consistent with this. They'd reviewed her serially. They acknowledged that she had cognitive impairments, but they thought that her profile was pretty stable and that it wasn't particularly consistent with any kind of known specific neurodegenerative pathology. And I agreed with them. I spoke to Lauren about that and I explained the nature and purpose of cognitive remediation and that she wouldn't actually be able to complete the program if we thought that she had a diagnosis of dementia, and that as part of the program we were expecting to see improvements in her abilities and that she would kind of show learning and changes in her cognition over time, which she was understanding of. So as I said, so Lauren was referred because she did have quite significant concerns around her memory. And also post-COVID, and this was sort of towards the end of lockdown, she really had a lack of like limited pleasurable and meaningful activities in her routines. She was really well supported by NDIS, but that was in terms of kind of attending appointments, kind of self-care, those kinds of tasks. In terms of having enjoyable activities, she just didn't really have any at that time. And she had a real lack of confidence in her ability to undertake these activities. So prior to seeing people, I do the occupational self-assessment with consumers, and that's just a way of kind of eliciting some goals that the person wants to work at. So we get people to rate their rate the tasks that they feel that they have the most difficulty on, and also the tasks that are kind of important to them, and the items that have the greatest discrepancy between difficulty and importance are the tasks that we choose to work on. So Lauren identified that she wanted to improve her concentration on tasks. She wanted to have a satisfying routine and be involved in activities. And she really wanted to keep mentally stimulated. She believed that she kind of understood in herself that doing things and keeping busy kept her feeling more well, kept her mood up, and she really wanted to start doing more activities and incorporating these into her day. So as part of cognitive remediation, I do some baseline testing with everyone. So Lauren had on the cognitive testing we did, she had some slowed processing speed. She had some executive dysfunction, particularly cognitive rigidity. She was quite black and white in her thinking. She had a lot of trouble shifting. And she did also have impaired memory. So particularly for more unstructured verbal material, so something like a word list. But when she was presented with material in a story or a more meaningful format, or when it was visually presented, so when she had to remember a design, she was totally within the normal range. Her performance was absolutely fine. So my kind of formulation of Lauren's kind of main kind of cognitive problem was that she did have memory and learning impairments, but these were likely secondary to her executive difficulties and her processing speed. And she did also just have this really marked rigidity and difficulty shifting her beliefs and her approach to activities and routines. Lauren also was very negative in her beliefs regarding her thinking skills, and she really lacked confidence in her ability to undertake and manage tasks. So these are the CogSmart goals that I set with Lauren, and Lauren and I worked on together, and these did actually kind of evolve over the process of therapy. So the first thing I'd speak to would be reading for pleasure. So Lauren was a true crime aficionado. She loved reading true crime, or she previously had really enjoyed reading true crime, but she just wasn't doing it anymore. She just felt like at home, she'd put on the TV, she'd sit down, she'd watch TV all day. And once she kind of got into that pattern, she wasn't really changing. And she really wanted to get back into reading true crime books. The other thing she wanted to do was listen to the radio. So she'd previously listened to kind of ABC News radio and some more kind of story-based radio in the morning. And she also noticed that she had stopped doing that. The radio, she was more just watching breakfast TV and felt like, again, once she kind of got started in that, kind of the course of her day got set down a pretty kind of sedentary sort of path. And this final one, this was a goal that evolved over the course of like towards the end of therapy, actually. So I'll speak more to, well, Lauren mostly did therapy over telehealth, and we worked a lot on her like confidence with using telehealth, and sort of towards the end of therapy, she actually really wanted to continue to do something online, and she wanted to do an online course. And this was something that she came to me quite independently in, sort of towards the end of therapy. And she wanted to do this, an online course. We kind of troubleshooted a couple of different options, and in the end, she decided that a friend who'd linked her in with a Bible study group was the path she wanted to go down. And she wanted to kind of be studying the Bible and catching up with people on a kind of weekly basis. So as I said before, I saw Lauren over telehealth. And so she initially required really high levels of support to use telehealth. So to use the screen share function, we had to do a lot of errorless learning strategies about that. I used to send her, like we had like written instructions, and we'd work through each step together and go through it really, really slowly. Initially, it would take about 20 minutes, I would say, for us to set up kind of just for the session. And towards the end, she was completely independent in this. She was very happy to use telehealth, like streaming, like these kind of platforms for other things. So it was really great to see kind of Lauren kind of gain confidence and ability in this. We completed the program over about 9 months and 50 sessions. So initially, it was very hard to get Lauren to commit to doing one session a week. And I think that's because of that cognitive rigidity. Lauren just had difficulty like if she had one kind of activity in the morning, she wouldn't kind of see that there was time to also do another activity in the afternoon. It was very hard to kind of find that kind of time to see her twice a week, but we did build up to it eventually with some time and some trust built. And by the end of the program, I actually had her seeing me once a week, and then she was also doing homework independently as well. So the strategies that I worked on with Lauren were focusing on elaboration. So Lauren had this really lovely strength in terms of her ability to learn information within a narrative. So we looked at how we could organize information in more meaningful ways and create connections. Also, when it came to, we were talking about the course, we also looked at how we could also then break down information into smaller chunks so she'd felt less overwhelmed. So that included some highlighting, some repetition, and also some ways of identifying easy or concrete elements of an activity and then moving on to more difficult ones. And the bridging of these kind of strategies to the tasks that Lauren wanted to be working on in her day-to-day life. So Lauren we worked on using her planner to identify free blocks of time that she could attend the library or put her radio on in the morning. Lauren had a really well set up planner by her NDIS OT, but it was really only for like ADLs, appointments, things like that. So what we tried to kind of use the strategy that she already had and just add some additional kind of information into that so she had some more pleasurable activities. We also spoke about when reading books or listening to the radio, connecting to the narrative and the gestalt and the wider meaning, instead of kind of, Lauren previously had a bit of a focus on having to remember all the details. And if she didn't remember all the details, then she had no recall of it at all. So we spoke more about how we often try to look at, like, what's the narrative, what's the meaning here? We also looked at doing strategies around highlighting and chunking. So when reviewing material for a Bible study, what were the important elements or the important points that she wanted to bring to a group discussion? So I'll briefly, like, these are the pre and post test scores that I did with Lauren. So blue is pre and green is after therapy. So as we can see, there's a very small general improvement in her overall abilities, but there's some really lovely improvements in terms of her immediate memory, which showed a really nice improvement from being in the clinical range to within the lower limits of the normal range. And also her delayed memory also showed a nice improvement. So the red here is the clinical range and the green is the borderline or impaired, like the borderline impaired range. So, and most importantly, in terms of kind of the functional outcomes for Lauren, by the end of therapy, she was attending the library 2 to 3 times a week to read kind of true crime books or to study. She had independently connected with an online Bible study group through a friend, and she was attending sessions weekly. She was reviewing readings for the group. We also talked about her doing a gardening or history course, and I'd handed that information over to our NDIS kind of workers to kind of consider in the future. She was also attending museum exhibitions and galleries regularly with her family and support workers. Lauren was really actually had a lot of interest in history. She had a lot of interest in gardening and photography. And so it was just about kind of, exploring ways that she could do this. And we did some goal attainment scaling with her as well. So if anyone's not familiar, the idea behind goal attainment scaling is that the -2 rating is where someone is currently, the 0 is what you're aiming for, and the 2 is an extension. And it's just a way of breaking down goals into steps. And at the end, so Lauren felt that she was reading 3 days a week. She was listening to the radio 3 days a week, but that had sort of become less of a priority as we'd worked our way through the program. It was really the course that kind of took the lead towards the end. So now I'm going to speak to another person, and again, quite a different young man, a 24-year-old young man of Chinese Australian heritage. He was also living with schizoaffective disorder and had been diagnosed with autism as an adult. His first contact with mental health services was in 2016, and he'd initially been seen by EPP, but was now in community case management. He was in the community. He'd had a long period of, again, a reasonably long period of stability in the community. And the referral was made following on from his MPI neuropsychology assessment. The neuropsychologist thought he would benefit from the program. He was a part-time university student doing an arts degree. So Jake was referred to the program because of concerns around his reading speed. He believed he was slower and he had occasions of hyperfocus. So he would get distracted by details that weren't particularly relevant and then kind of follow those instead of focusing on what the reading actually was about. And he wanted support with his university education and long-term career goals. Jake wanted to work in the public service. And the goals that he identified using the OSA were more effectively using his abilities, identifying and solving problems, and working towards his goals. So the CogSmart goals that we developed were Jake having less occasions of hyperfocus, disregarding irrelevant content, and also increasing the amount of time he was able to concentrate on while reading. So on the baseline testing that I did with Jake, he had really strong verbal skills that came out as a really nice strength, but he was impaired in terms of his processing speed, his attention, and aspects of his executive functioning. And he did have some difficulty with learning unstructured verbal material. So again, something like a wet list. And I thought that based on his performance on testing, his main cognitive problem was that he was very highly detail focused. He had a lot of problems identifying relevant elements or appreciating kind of the problem as a whole. And there were also some contributing factors. Oh, hi, Robin. Oh, sorry. He also had some OCD symptomatology and also the spectrum symptomatology, which probably also likely contributing to his hyperfocus and distractibility. So I saw Jake over a combination of individual, face-to-face, group and telehealth sessions. And he completed the program over 3 months and 20 sessions. So as we can see, quite a bit quicker than Lauren. By the end of the program, we'd sort of switched to focusing on Jake attending the group really regularly and using homework. And that was to support transfer of the skills that we were practicing to his university goals. And on completion of formal therapy with myself, Jake actually continued to work on the advanced tasks independently. So Jake actually already had a lot of really highly personalized, individually developed cognitive strategies that he'd developed during his studies. So instead of focusing on so much providing him with new strategies, we instead focused on metacognition. So the idea behind that was that we wanted Jake to look at identifying the main goal or purpose of activity, considering his strategy selection based on this goal, and looking at ways of identifying if a strategy he'd selected was inefficient or if it wasn't working as well as it could be, and either changing it, adaptifying it, or modifying it to improve efficiency. So these were the skills that we practiced during therapy. And Jake bridged these. So he used the same metacognitive framework that we were practicing during therapy while doing his reading. So he would kind of review his own strategies, update and modify these within the task to improve efficiency, and also look at recognizing different strategies for different reading tasks and different task requirements and goals. So I think the thing where Jake noticed this the most was when he started thinking about reading for pleasure. He was an English major, and he wanted to get back into reading more for pleasure rather than just reading only for his university readings, compared to what he would be how he would be reading when he was doing university reading, and like the level of detail he would need to focus on there. So in terms of pre and post testing here, we can see that Jake is mostly performing in the average range, a little bit low for what we might expect for someone who was attending university, and there were some impairments in terms of his attention. Again, there's a very small kind of general improvement in his overall abilities, but there's some really nice shifts in terms of his speed and efficiency on that attention index. And we're basically coming out of the impaired range and into the lower end of the normal range for that one. And again, on that delayed memory one, there's a really nice improvement there. And in terms of, again, the really important stuff, so the things that Jake noticed in himself. So Jake had noticed that he had improved efficiency in his reading. He thought he had less occasions of hyperfocus. He believed he was about 95% of his baseline prior to his psychosis onset. He reported confidence in his thinking skills, and he was discharged from the mental health service on completion of the program. And there was a plan for him to be followed up more by an ASD specific psychologist. Jake kind of wanted to engage more with ASD related practitioners following discharge. So Jake believed on completion. So he thought that when he was reading, that his occasions of hyperfocus of kind of following on a tangent weren't happening anymore. And he thought that he'd really sped up while reading pages for reading, and had timed himself. He was pretty dedicated and focused on the therapy, which was great to work with. So, and again, I'm going to speak for this final person. Again, quite a different kind of presentation. So Russ is a 50-year-old man living with schizophrenia. He had his first episode in 1997. He had multiple admissions in Victoria, and he was actually referred to Cognitive from the Mental Health Rehabilitation Unit, and he'd been admitted there after he spontaneously flew to Sydney when unwell, and a missing persons report had actually been filed by his family in Melbourne. He was discharged to community mental health services during the program, and he was living in a boarding house with NGO supports. And Russ was discharged to community mental health services during the worst of the Sydney lockdown. So I believe it was like June, July 2021. And that did have its own impacts on therapy that I'll go into here. So Russ was referred for CRT for what he described as having a frontal lobe problem. And he noticed that he had real difficulties thinking sequentially. His organization was quite poor, and he also had a lot of difficulties with impulsivity. So the goals that Russ identified that he wanted to work on were concentrating on tasks and having a satisfying routine and being involved in activities and tasks and involved in the community. Russ was a really sociable man. He wanted to be engaged in the community. He wanted to be participating, and that was really important to him. So as I can say, so here, these are the goals that we developed while I was working with Russ. So Russ had recently gained, he'd previously had a financial management in place, and he was now in control of his own finances, which was really important to Russ and something that he took very seriously and wanted to make sure he continued to have that level of control over his finances. His other goals, unfortunately, were quite community-based. They were about kind of accessing the community and vocational goals. And unfortunately, we just couldn't set a lot of specific goals at that time because of the lockdown and just the nature of Russ not being able to leave the house as often as he would have liked, I think, which was a little bit frustrating. But what we did was we instead focused on what we could do, and that was around improving his attention when reviewing forms and documents. So in terms of baseline testing when working with Russ had really significant executive dysfunction. So he had strikingly notable impulsivity issues. His organization was poor. He could be quite concrete in his reasoning. And he did have difficulties with learning new information, which was likely secondary to that learning those kind of executive issues. And I sort of formulated Russ's main cognitive problem as having this really rushed approach to task, being really impulsive. His attention to detail was really poor, being quite disorganized. There were also some contributing factors. So Russ did have residual positive psychotic symptoms. He had some delusions of grandeur. He would speak sometimes to Bill Gates being in contact with him. Russ also had dyslexia, also told me that he'd been diagnosed with dyslexia, and we don't have any confirmation of that, but I would say Russ did have quite a lot of difficulty with spelling and irregular words. And I sort of have taken him on his word there that there may have been something going on in terms of a specific learning disability, which also may have affected some aspects of his engagement with the program. So we saw Russ initially at the mental health rehab unit as part of a small group, and then on discharge to community, he continued over telehealth. The program was completed over about 4 months and 40 sessions, and Russ had really good perseverance with the program. He persevered despite a lot of technical issues. We did a lot of troubleshooting around that and the nature of the lockdown at the time. So the strategies that we worked on with Russ were stopping, thinking and doing. So slowing down his approach to tasks, rereading questions, double checking his answers, checking for accuracy. We also did a lot of work around organizational strategies, so categorization, so identifying similarities between material to help him with his recall, and visualization. So Russ was a really creative guy. He had a lot of creative ideas. He was very, he had a lot of alternative spiritual beliefs. And we often spoke about drawing on kind of visual strengths and creating visual pictures to assist with his learning. So the bridging that we did with Russ was setting up he was wanting to set up a website for a new business. So we did some bridging around making sure that there were no spelling errors, no grammatical errors, and using strategies to kind of check for those. As I said, we were also looking at reviewing. He had some financial documents and statements that he wanted to review. So the strategies that we did there were setting a time limit, working for a short period of time, identifying a system and following through with this, double checking important details. And again, I'll just speak to, there's a very kind of generalized pattern of improvement across all the indices here, quite a nice improvement in his total score. He goes from being in the clinical range to being in the lower end of the normal range. This visuospatial index had a really significant shift, and I think that reflects the really significant change in his approach to tasks, how much more slowed down he was, how more organized he was. His attention to detail had really improved, and I think that's coming out in that visuospatial index. So Russ self-reported improved concentration and attention to detail, and I'd have to say I consistently noted this as well. And he thought that he'd previously gone from being someone who never double checked things, he just kind of would do them and dash them off, to being someone who was double checking all his documents. He thought about 90% of the time. And just after the end of the program, Russ actually returned to Melbourne, and he was doing that to be closer to his family and supports. And I think that reflected a really good change for Russ, and a nice kind of shift in his mental state. So just in terms of those 3 case studies, I think all demonstrated really good attainment of their personally developed CogSmart goals. And like this, I'm not going to make any claims that this is an RCT or any kind of experimental design, but it was nice to see that overall cognitive scores improved for all. And although it was quite small in some cases, and there was some variability across some indices. And there was a really nice positive shift on the cognitive testing. So people were going from the clinical range to the normal range on a lot of really important indices, which was great to see. So clients who engaged, I guess kind of what I came away from this was that clients who engaged really well with this program, they all had really identifiable cognitive concerns. All the clients who were referred, and these clients all had really clear, identifiable cognitive concerns. And they also knew how this impacted on the functional activities they were doing, or the functional activities that they were wanting to do. And they had really lovely functional goals, which could be bridged to using strategies developed across the tasks. And this was regardless of any differences in their chronicity of their illness, the severity of their illness, their baseline cognition, the nature of their cognitive impairments, and even the types of goals we were targeting. So yeah, so that was kind of a good kind of reflection for me on these 3 clients who have participated really well in the program. Does anyone have any questions?
Wonderful. Chloe, thank you so much for a really great talk. Wonderful just to have a little bit of the background about cognitive remediation therapy, about why it's a really important thing to start thinking about and talking about in the population of people with complex psychosis. And also, you know, demonstrating through your 3 great case examples how it really can impact on the lives of people who previously, you know, we might have said, oh, well, cognitive deficits, there's not much that can be done about those, they're not a target of medication, but we now know, I think, that we actually can challenge that old belief that deficits are present and then not going anywhere. We know through cognitive remediation and indeed through other means that we can change the function of the brain, and we can change people's ability to function in day-to-day life. You brought that through really clearly in the case studies, that there were some changes in cognition, but actually what was really remarkable, and we see this in other studies too, is that people's function really changes positively.
Yeah.
I might just get you to comment on that, Chloe, while I ask Sarah to share the polls. We're just going to ask everybody to answer a couple of polls while we chat, Chloe. So
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your experience? It's obviously a very sort of personal and heartwarming experience working with people and seeing them improve and so on. But tell us a little bit about this cognition versus function idea with CogRem.
I guess and look, I'm a neuropsychologist. I love numbers. I love the I love test scores. But I think the thing that I've taken away from this is it's really nice to see how you can use the numbers and see changes in people's like functioning. Absolutely. And I believe I think it's been really nice to see that. I think it's been nice to see how you can use test scores to kind of develop strategies that improve functioning. So yeah, I think we it's easy to get focused on numbers and changes in cognition, but I think the main thing that's been really helpful for me is seeing kind of the outcomes for people. Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. And one other comment, Chloe, before I throw it open to the Q&A. I see we have a couple of questions being lined up for you there, but I just wanted to comment on how intense a therapy it is. So you mentioned with Lauren that in fact you met for 50 sessions over 9 months, and that shows real commitment on both your part and on the part of Lauren. So these aren't easy wins, but I mean, there aren't many easy wins when we're working with people with severe mental illness.
Yeah, and look, I think that Lauren was a bit slower than some of the other, just kind of it took her a little bit more time. And as I said as well, initially, our first initial sessions, we spent a lot of time just trying to get the screen share, get the technical side of things, and that took time. That took time for her to learn. But it was actually a really great experience for me to kind of I literally saw errorless learning in practice. We were doing errorless learning to help her learn how to use the telehealth, and it was really wonderful to see how it worked and how
it was a sort of bridging task in and of itself.
It was a bridging task for everyone. so that was really it was really wonderful. Lauren, it took time, and I think that was okay. She was really committed to therapy and she really wanted to engage. So it was, and yeah, that was nice. It was, and I think with someone with her where you could see the improvements, that was an easy kind of call.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, Chloe, I'm going to take us across to the Q&A now. I'll just start at the top. So the first question that was asked when you were talking about the different questionnaires and assessment tools that you use was from, not sure who that is, but the question is, you use the occupational self-assessment. Is this the OSA from MOHO suite of assessments?
I don't actually know what the MOHO suite is. I'm sorry. I may need some more info from that questionnaire. But the OSA was something that, because this is very much a multidisciplinary therapy program. I work with OTs, I work with other psychologists, and the OTs kind of suggested that as the function, one of the functional assessments, and a way of setting some goals. So that was our reasoning behind that. I think someone's added a little bit extra info here. Model of human occupation. Yes, look, again, I think that sounds like it may be an OT and they may know a little bit better themselves.
So it sounds like it is the same tool. The occupational self-assessment is the commonly used OSA by OTs and so on. All right, thanks for that, Chloe. And then a related question from Kathy Pearson. What tests do you use when undertaking baseline testing?
So we do the RBANS, so the repeatable battery assessment of neuropsychological status, when we're doing the baseline testing and the post-testing, and that's the one we do for everyone. I sometimes, because I'm a neuropsychologist, I like doing cognitive testing. I sometimes add a few additional tasks in, so I'll often do some tasks from the WAIS, the Wechsler adult intelligence scale. So I'll do some tasks around verbal reasoning and visual reasoning, and also from the Dallas Kaplan executive functioning system. So a Stroop based test for inhibitory control. But the main one we do is the R bands, and that was the one I was reporting on. But yeah, like I said, I quite enjoy doing testing, so I add a few extra bits in.
Okay, that's great. Chloe, do you know if COGRAM has been accessed by NDIS as a capacity building tool, or is it considered a treatment rather than a support?
Oh gosh, I no, because I was recently speaking with my supervisor, Matt Thomas, about this, and he shared me a link for the NDIS and what that, because NDIS have recommended it as an evidence-based treatment.
Excellent.
But I'm not sure the exact terminology. But what was it? So if it's a capacity building or
I guess it comes down to in NDIS we can get funded for certain things but not for others. So is it considered a capacity building tool, or is it considered a treatment rather than a support? I believe we can't get monies for treatments under NDIS, but if it was support or capacity building, it might be possible.
Yeah, I did just see yeah, my supervisor Matt did just send me a link that showed that NDIS were approving it as a treatment for or I guess an intervention for psychosocial therapies. So
okay, well that's wonderful. And perhaps what we could do after the talk is to share information about that with the audience via the email, because it would be really fantastic if people across the state were able to start accessing COGRAM for their clients who have NDIS packages, or expand the NDIS package to ask for that. Okay, the questions are coming thick and fast now, Chloe. So what would Michael Kalina asks, what should we be planning in relation to human resources, for example, recruitment? So this is a big question, isn't it? I mean, how do we increase access to COGRAM in mental health services?
I guess I would say the one thing that's been really helpful for our service is having someone, and I don't think it's like having someone whose job is around providing COGRAM and supporting the COGRAM program and supporting other clinicians who are doing it. So having someone who it's part of their role to do, I think is really important and helps with longevity. I think otherwise you're just kind of relying on people who may just have, like, it's their personal interest, it's their passion, and that's wonderful. But if you have it as part of someone's role, and obviously I think a neuropsychologist is well suited for that. We're always going to be passionate about cognition and improving cognition. I think that is a thing to consider.
I agree. So if there's any policymakers listening, please make it core business for people with severe mental illness. So next question, Chloe, is from Liz Ahumada, who asks, where can we access further training? Can you recommend a program or training?
So look, I can speak to the circuits program, which is what we use. That provides a training program, so people are accredited as a therapist to provide it. And you
can complete that online.
You can complete it online. It's self-directed. It's about 30 hours. So that's what we've been doing. Yeah. So that and I think people have found that generally very approachable and doable.
Fantastic.
But there are other options, but yeah, that's the one we do.
Liz, if you would like to directly email Chloe, you could share the info about the circuits training.
Yep, absolutely.
Fabulous. Thank you. And then just the last question before we finish up and talk about next month's webinar, Chloe, is do you accept referrals from across the state for the COGRAM program?
Look, I guess in some cases, if people have been seen through TRSP, if they've come and done an assessment with TRSP, I have. But I guess that would be a fairly individualized issue.
That's right. And that would be a good starting point. It's a good segue into our sort of just reminding people about TRSP, and we're available for referrals of people who have complex psychosis. And it can be for something as straightforward or as a neuropsych opinion only, a suitability for COGRAM, access to the COGRAM program. So please do think of us and think of TRSP if you have a complex patient who you'd welcome a second opinion on. I'd like to just ask Sarah to share the last couple of slides. We should have information up about next month's webinar.
Oh, I can do that.
Oh, thanks, Chloe.
That's me.
And next month, we're going to have a talk by Professor Anthony Harris on ECT, and the talk title is Evidence for the Use of ECT in Treatment-Resistant Schizophrenia, and that's in 4 weeks' time, 12th of July at 12 p.m. We will send out an email for you to register by, and it just remains for me really to say a huge thank you to Chloe for a great talk and wonderful clinical examples of how useful program can be. And we'll sign off now. Thank you everybody for coming along today. All the best. Bye.